Hello, sorry about the delay. It's been a few days. I had a bit of a blip, you know, where you're all kind of planned to kind of go rah, and then it's like nope. I don't know if you heard on the last recording, but we had a few clicks, and those few clicks on my chair. And I hate to make excuses, but I'm going to do this one. I made the mistake of leaving the cats outside, and Davros was wanting to come in, so please excuse me. So yes, my other chair went kaput, and I've got a new one which is really comfortable, and it really helps because of other requirements as well. So yes, now I'm comfy in a new chair that was on offer, half price, spanking, yes. So as ever, if you're leaving a little note in the comments, let me know how you are. I'm still missing out on one person that I haven't seen, and I'm a bit concerned. Especially coming out of Christmas. I had a bit of a blip myself in the past week, and it's kind of like, you know, I am concerned, and I do worry about you all. And thank you very much for your good wishes as well, because your support means the world. It really, really does, and I do appreciate you. I know I say it a lot, and I waffle on about it a lot, but it's because it's true, and it deserves to be repeated over and over and over again ad nauseum. Right, lovely beans. Okie dokie then. Let's see how well Jane and Bjorn work together. And don't forget, as ever, if you could hit that notifications bell, share, subscribe if you want to. If you don't follow the channel, please follow the channel, because it really does help. And if you can put a little like on there, that'd be awesome. If you don't like it, I'm really sorry. You know, you can always drop me an email and let me know any improvements that you think could be made. But I shall stop waffling now, because it's nearly on for 2 minutes, and we want to get on with this chapter 17, part 2 of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved Mr. Tom Holt. When eventually Bjorn did find it, by walking into it and switching it on forcefully with his nose, he was extremely grateful. Right, he said. Hey. Jane gave him a look, and it was not friendly. Of course, it wasn't his fault that the switch that operated the huge machine was right next to the light switch, and that he had a fairly broad nose, but she really wasn't in the mood to make allowances. Don't just stand there, she snapped. Switch the bloody thing off, quick! Bjorn reached out an arm, but too late. A force like a water cannon hit him in the chest and sent him bouncing off the walls like a squash ball until he came to rest up in a corner of the ceiling. He had the unpleasant feeling that was the only temporary. Basically, just so long as the ceiling could take the pressure. You idiot! Came Jane's voice from somewhere he could not see. What have you done? Where are you? He panted back. It wasn't easy. It was as if someone was trying to fold his shirt without removing him from it first. I can't. If you must know, I'm in the fireplace. Bjorn looked around and noticed the tips of 2 shoes poking out of the chimney breast. Face facts, his soul whispered to his brain. Even by your standards, there have been more auspicious starts to a relationship. Who's doing it? He tried to shout, but his voice came out ironed and pressed. It's that stupid machine, boomed the voice from the chimney. It's pumping air into this room faster than it can escape. Any minute now, and I'll be off up this chimney like a bullet up a gun. Satisfied? Halt! Bjorn struggled, pitting his pectoral muscles against the force of the machine. On! That's embarrassment for you. Real, ear-tingling, bowel-churning embarrassment. Adrenaline is positively inert in comparison. He kicked frantically against the wall, but all he achieved was a short rain of crumbling plaster. Garming! His hand found the penknife in his trouser pocket. Great, Jane replied. That's really cheered me up, you know. Until recently, Bjorn had always prided himself that he'd kept in pretty good shape. Until very recently, in fact, right up until a few seconds ago, when life had suddenly decided that he'd look better in just 2 dimensions, like there was the little matter of his self-esteem being at stake here as well. With an effort that a mere scientist would have dismissed as physically impossible, he pulled the knife out of his pocket, opened the big blade first go, and let the pressure do the rest. It drove the knife into the wall, which went pop. Then there was a long, loud, extremely extremely vulgar sound, followed by a thump as Bjorn fell off the wall onto his head. "It's all right," he gasped a few moments later. "I've switched it off now."
"About time, too,"
came the reply from a very long way off.
"Now will you please get me out of this chimney?"
That proved to be the hardest one yet, and Bjorn was on the point of cutting his losses and tiptoeing quietly away when he noticed that the machine had a gear lever, and the gear lever had two positions, one marked forward and one marked reverse. "When you're quite finished," said Jane as she crawled out of the fireplace, "maybe we can get back to looking for the door." Bjorn nodded. There were little bright dots and flashes in front of his eyes, and the rest of him felt roughly the way you'd expect a tree to feel after someone has just turned it into a newspaper. "The door," he whispered. "Right. I don't think there is one, you know." Jane breathed in deeply. "We came in. Through the wall, you mean? Or did someone wash the universe and it shrank?" Bjorn nodded. "I think I know this place," he said doggedly. "Used to work in this department once. This is the room where they don't need a door." The sardonic comment withered on Jane's lips. Instead, "They don't?" she asked. "No need," Bjorn replied. "The reason being, this place is basically, inside your head. We are in justice." "Justice?" Jane blinked twice. "Look, where I come from, they have this thing called logic and—" "Yeah," Bjorn replied, "and justice. Like it works by being what you think should actually happen to you. Conscience and all that stuff. So they don't have to bring you here because you're already here to begin with. That's what they reckon anyway," he added. "I never thought I had that much imagination, Jane nodded. "Nor me," she said. "I think they brought me here. If this was my conscience, I reckon I had recognised it by now. It would be full of unwashed cups and dirty kitchen floors." Bjorn raised an eyebrow. "Since when did they need washing?" he asked. "Later," Jane replied. "I think I've worked it out. Very simple, though not very pleasant. Where do you put inconvenient people so that nobody can ever find them?" Narrator's note: I believe they become traffic wardens or anybody who works in customer service. I digress. Where do you put inconvenient people so that nobody can ever find them? Inside your head, of course. And suppose that you're not actually allowed to do it. You'd feel guilty, wouldn't you? Or, at the very least, extremely worried about being found out. So, you put them in your conscience. Probably it just happens that way without you making the conscious decision, but it's a very suitable place because, in the very nature of things, your conscious is the one part of your brain that's always kept sealed off from the rest. "So where are we?" Bjorn asked. Jane frowned. "That's a good question," she replied. "First, I thought maybe I'd died and gone to hell, but then I thought, hang on. If this was hell, I'd be able to see the people who dreamed up the idea of putting fruit juice in little cardboard cartons with individual straws." She sighed. "So I guess it's option number 2. Bjorn didn't actually click his tongue impatiently, because you don't do that sort of thing around visions of sublime loveliness. There was, however, a slight spasm in the muscles of his jaw. "Go on," he said. "Which means," Jane continued, "we're inside somebody's head." There was a pause while Bjorn, for the want of a better word, thought about it. "Nah," he replied. "We wouldn't fit for one thing. You'd have legs sticking out through ears and all sorts." Jane sat down on a lump of masonry and inspected the damage to her footwear. "It's all a matter of dimensions," she replied warily. "I could be wrong, but I've got an idea that you lot are rather more flexible when it comes to that sort of thing than we are. I mean," she added with a slight shudder, "all that business with time." Bjorn frowned. What's that got to do with it? He asked. I don't know, Jane confessed. During physics lessons at school, I was always the one at the back of the class drawing sea serpents in the margins. I just feel that someone with the capability of coning off 2 lanes of the later Roman Empire isn't going to have too much difficulty in tucking us 2 away between their ears. Bjorn digested this for a moment. Okay, he said, so we're inside some guy's head? No problem. He stood up, grabbed hold of a large lump of rock and started banging it against the wall. Plaster fell from the ceiling in little clouds. What exactly are you doing? Jane inquired. Well, Bjorn replied, between gasps for breath, if you're right, pretty soon a big hole's going to appear and a couple of aspirin are going to come flying in here. That's when we make our... Jane sighed. Maybe I was oversimplifying, she said. I mean, yes, we're inside this person's head, but we're also in a different dimension. These things are very complicated, you know. Oh. Bjorn sagged, and he let the rock fall. So what have you got in mind, then? Nothing really, Jane replied sadly. I think we're trapped. If you really want to know, I think we're stuck in here forever and ever. Brilliant, isn't it? Bjorn shook his head. You're wrong, he said. Look, everything that exists is a thing, right? And everything that's a thing can be broken, or smashed up, or knackered, right? All we've got to do is find out where to kick it and where away. He stood up straight, put his shoulders back and started to walk purposefully around the room, stopping occasionally to bang the walls hard with his head. For her part, Jane put her arms around her knees and curled up. It was bad enough being stuck, she thought. She could really have done without the company. Her ideal companion for the rest of eternity was... Well, it wasn't a subject she'd given a great deal of thought to. Narrator's note. I think it would be really difficult to just be incarcerated with one other person for eternity. I mean, you can always find a way to make it work, obviously, because you have to survive. Well, if you want to. And it's just, I think with just one other person, that might be difficult. I mean, in some cases, it'd be really, really nice, but in some cases, it'd be like, I need a wall. Jane's ideal companion for the rest of eternity was... Well, it wasn't a subject she'd given a great deal of thought to, what with one thing and another. A-levels first, then briefly the rainforests and the threat of nuclear weapons, and latterly mostly the quantum mass of accrued back ironing, but it certainly wasn't a 6-foot blonde Nordic idiot whose reading probably stopped short at alcohol 4.5% by volume. Please dispose of can tidally. If someone was out to get her, so far they were doing a pretty neat job. Hey, Bjorn called out. Sounds pretty hollow over here. What does? The wall? Oh, probably an interdimensional partition of some kind. Gosh, thought Jane, I'm hungry. Definitely hollow, Bjorn continued. Perhaps if I gave it a really good thumping with something hard and solid. I thought you'd just tried that. Well, it's better than just sitting there, Bjorn replied coldly. He looked around and then set about trying to lift a larger-than-average lump of masonry. He failed. Oh, there's the chimney, he added. That looks like it goes somewhere. Jane sniffed. Quite probably, she replied. Given that the universe is curved, it probably goes backwards, up itself, eventually, I mean. Yeah, said Bjorn uncertainly. Right. You know, what I could really use right now is a bloody big hammer. Look, Jane snapped. You're just wasting your time. We aren't inside a room. We aren't inside anything. We're just inside. She waved her arms irritably. So will you please stop banging around because you're starting to get on my nerves? Reluctantly, Bjorn put down the promising-looking slab of breeze block he'd been trying for weight and balance and paced up and down a few steps, humming. Then he got down on his hands and knees and tried staring up the chimney. Maybe, he said, if we're inside this guy's head, like you said, This chimney's actually a nostril or something. Yeah, he added brightly, and that pump thing, you know, the one we had done just now, maybe that's something to do with the breathing gear. Please, Jane mumbled, as she lay on her back with her eyes closed. Would you mind terribly much just shutting up for a while, because I'd like to try and get some sleep. Bjorn glowered at her. All right, he growled. Just let me have one more go, okay? Please yourself, Jane replied irritably, and turned over on her side. Bjorn nodded purposefully. He was in love. He was trapped inside somebody's head. Something he couldn't understand had tried to spread him all over the walls like butter. And what he wanted most of all in the whole wide world was 50 centilitres of ice-cold Budweiser. Narrator's note, I can think of better drinks to be drinking, because Budweiser, seriously. Anyway, I digress. It's not... I like Stella. I don't like Budweiser. Budweiser's kind of like... Stella to Budweiser is diesel to fresh air. I digress. Sorry if you like Budweiser. He spat on his hands, hefted the chunk of breeze block, and gave the corner of the mantelpiece a bone-jarring wallop. Now, various things happened. Several pieces of shrapnel broke off the mantelpiece. The lights flickered. Ganga materialised in mid-air, fell heavily and rolled on the ground, clutching his ankle and groaning. A hole appeared in one of the walls and the floor suddenly flooded with a sea of soluble aspirin. The final event was Bjorn splashing across the floor, grabbing Ganga by the lapels and shaking him as if he contained a mixture of gin and vermouth. "Stop, you bastard!" he snapped. "What the hell kept you?" Staff tightened his half-Nelson on finance and general purposes right arm and grinned like a maniac. The trick was apparently to keep the bastard's mind occupied until Ganga could get out of it. This was getting increasingly harder. "Another thing I bet you don't know about 15th century Florentine religious painting," he said. "Stop," said Jane. It wouldn't have taken much imagination to see wisps of smoke drifting out of her ears. "Stop!" Ganga grinned sheepishly. "D. Ganga," he replied. "What did you think the D stood for anyway? Norman?" There are times when you can feel the situation drifting away from you. "But why?" she heard herself ask. "Does that mean there's two of you, or what?" Ganga shook his head. "Coincidence," he said. "It just so happens that where I come from, Doppel is a very traditional name." He paused. "It's part," he added, "of our rich and ancient cultural heritage." "Where you come from?" Jane repeated. "I thought you were—" "Yes," Ganga interrupted. "Well, anyway, this isn't getting us anywhere, is it? Talking of which, I'll bet you don't know where you are. I mean, I could give you 3 guesses and you would never—" "Inside the head of the chairman of the Finance and General Purposes Committee," Jane replied flatly. "To be precise, locked inside his conscience." She sniffed histrionically. "Give me credit for a little common sense, please." Ganga sagged. "Right," he said. "Now, and I think I've seen everything I want to," Jane went on brutally, "so if you'll just see your way to getting me out of here, then I'll be very much obliged to you." "Right, and what is more," Jane added, "you can accept my resignation. I have had enough of all of this. I want to go back to being a terminally bored and frustrated human being, stuck in the same old mindless rut, if that's all the same to you. In fact," she added savagely, "if I ever get out of this head in one piece, I am going straight to the nearest poly to enrol for accountancy classes. Got that?" Ganga nodded, and then he vanished. He rematerialised in complete darkness, but that was all right. Something soft broke his fall, something soft and strangely comfortable. He reached in his top pocket for his slimline flashlight. Then he grinned. He was completely surrounded by ironing. Further inspection revealed that it was ironing strewn untidily across an unwashed kitchen floor, while on the edge of the penumbra cast by his small torch, he could make out the silhouette of a sink piled high with saucepans and baking trays. Narrator's note, this is my absolute worst frickin' nightmare, but I digress. He nodded. He'd come to the right place. "Look," said the walls and the floor. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe," Ganga replied, lying back on a heap of creased and wrinkly cotton blouses and putting his hands behind his head. "Quite possibly, but you can't blame me for trying." "It's absurd," replied the walls and the floor. "I'm inside his head, you're inside mine. It's all going to end up like that trick where you have two mirrors facing each other and the reflections go on and on forever. For all I know, we could end up disappearing or something." "Nah," Ganga yawned. "Trust me, I know about these things. I've been inside more heads than you've had hot dinners." He paused and peered across at the sink. "And that's saying something, apparently. Hey, Les Cruzettes." I've got a set of their narratives now. I absolutely freaking hate those. They're so heavy. I mean, they're pretty, don't get me wrong, and I suppose they cook really well, but my eckers are really heavy. My mum used to have a set of green ones back in the day. Yeah. Do you know what I think? I've got my air fryer now, and I've got like one pan to kind of like do everything in pretty much, which I don't use anymore. Yeah. I've got my air fryer, I've got my rice cooker, that's all I freaking need. Bosh. I've lost myself on kitchenware. How can I do that? How can I lose myself on kitchenware? "Leave my kitchenware out of this," replied the floor. "And while you're in there, you can see for yourself. If you can find one scrap of remorse for me handing in my notice." Ganga grinned. Then slowly he took a large flat packet from underneath his coat and started to unwrap it. "Hey!" shrieked the ceiling. "That's not fair! You can't do that!" "Who's going to stop me?" Ganga said simply. Then he bit through a strand of sellotape. "But it's against the rules," howled the far wall. "You can't bring things of your own into my head. It's brainwashing." Ganga studied the floor pointedly. "Looks like it could do with it," he said. "If your mother were to see this floor, she would have a—" "You leave my mother out of this." "I can do," Ganga replied. He walked across to the sink, picked up a cheese-encrusted kitchen knife and set to work with it on the wrappings of the parcel. "Depends on how reasonable you can be." "What have you got in there anyway?" "Guilt," Ganga chuckled. "Highly refined, industrial strength, concentrated remorse. So don't sneeze or make any sudden movements for both our sakes. Or you'll spend the rest of your life with people hiding sharp objects whenever you come into a room." "You bastard!" Ganga said nothing. He wasn't looking sheepish anymore. "I think you're bluffing. You wouldn't dare, bet. If you let go one drop of that stuff, as soon as you come out, I will kill you." "Oh, no, you won't," Ganga replied grimly. "You'll be so sorry for everything else you've done. You'll positively beg me to let you carry on working for us. It's amazing stuff, this," he added nonchalantly. "In the plant where they process it, they have to stop every 5 minutes and confess." The walls seemed to shrink a little. The floor quivered. "In fact," Ganga went on, "you wouldn't believe some of the things they confess to. We had an assistant production manager phone up the newspapers and claim responsibility for the San Andreas fault the other day. Said San Andreas was framed. We had our work cut out hushing that one up, I can tell you." "All right. You win. Put it away." "I have a 5-year contract in my left inside pocket," Ganga said slowly. "Also a pen and something to rest on." "All right. Just put it away before you drop it or something." "Thank you," Ganga said. "You won't be sorry, or at least not half as sorry as you would have been if I'd—" "All right." There was a blur. It hardly lasted any time at all, which was just as well. Imagine a cinemascope projection of the Rockies pulled through a 2-inch hole backwards. "Here we are then," Ganga said cheerfully. "All safe," and Staff looked up and let go of his prisoner. "What the hell do you think you've been doing?" he demanded. The prisoner made a little moaning noise, sagged forwards and collapsed. Ganga looked at him. "There wasn't any call to get heavy," he said reproachfully. "Besides, We need him. Staff growled.
I didn't get heavy,
he said.
not unless you could call explaining the plot of Tristan and Isolde 3 times consecutively and trying to make it sound interesting getting heavy,
he added bitterly.
Sounds pretty heavy to me,
Ganga replied.
Never mind, though. Here we all are.
He looked down and prodded the slumped body with his toe.
Somebody throw a bucket of water over him or something.
Excuse me? Ganga and Staff looked round. Excuse me, said Jane, but the deal's off. It was under duress and absolutely unfair, and I am not signing anything. She folded her arms, and Bjorn simultaneously took a step forward. No, there was an awful lot of them, and although it was undeniably true that mere physical violence wouldn't have any effect whatsoever on the likes of Ganga and Staff, they both shrank back a few inches. After all, there was no way of telling that he knew that.
Who's this?
Staff asked.
Ah, yes,
Ganga replied, trying to smear a thin coat of self-confidence over his voice.
Friend of mine I'd like you to meet.
Staff considered this for a moment.
If he's a friend of yours, he observed, then why is he holding you 2 feet off the ground by your lapels? Does that mean he's really glad to see you or something?
You bastard, said Bjorn. You slimy, toffee-nosed little git. You went off and left me in that. Bjorn paused and made a thorough search of his vocabulary for the right word. Given the size of Bjorn's vocabulary, it was a bit like looking for a combine harvester in a haystack. In that dump, he said decisively, which only goes to show that you don't need to lug a dictionary around between your ears to be able to come up with the more just. More just? Narrator's note, is that more just? Mot justai. Mot justai. Say it that way.
Oh, come on,
Ganga replied.
It wasn't that bad, surely?
It was the wrong thing to say. Ganga suddenly found himself an inch away from the angriest pair of eyes he'd ever come across.
Right, sunshine,
said Bjorn quietly.
You can read minds, right? Up to a point. Maybe you'd fancy having a quick look around what I've got in mind for you.
Ganga swallowed hard.
I would rather not, he replied. You do realise, of course, that physical discomfort has no effect on me whatsoever.
Sure. Jane made a tooting noise. Put him down, she said briskly. If you frighten him, he'll probably go and hide in my subconscious, and I've had enough trouble with it over the years as it is. Who are you, anyway? Bjorn swung his head around and blushed. He stammered.
Well, my name's sort of Bjorn, that is.
Hello, Bjorn. Aren't you forgetting something, by the way? Bjorn's eyes filled with panic as he struggled to identify the social error he'd just committed. Should he have shaken her hand, he wondered, or offered to give up his seat or carry her bag for her? Were you actually supposed to say your name on a first date? He looked around wildly for a door to open.
I think she means about putting me down,
Ganga whispered. Without moving his head, Bjorn relaxed his fingers slightly. There was a thump, and something down by his feet said,
Thank you very much.
How do you come into this anyway? Jane was asking. You don't look like a...
He's not,
Ganga broke in.
Or at least he used to be, but he's not anymore. Now he is a supergrass.
Jane was about to say a what, and Staff was on the point of asking,
Look, just what is going on here?
And Bjorn was poised to hit somebody when the heap on the floor groaned and moved slightly, and looked up, and saw Bjorn, and screamed. Or at least one of him did. One of the risks inherent in high managerial office, with all the accompanying stress and nervous tension of departmental politics, is that of developing a dual personality. Usually it's regarded as something to be avoided, but it can have its advantages. To take a good example, It meant that whereas half of Finance and General Purpose's personality was making small squeaking noises and trying to hide itself in the pile of the carpet, the other half was striding angrily down the corridors of the security barracks, yelling furiously and banging on doors with a riding crop. Where Finance and General Purposes had an advantage over the run-of-the-mill psychotic was being able to provide separate corporeal incarnations for each of his separate personas, or, to put it another way, 2 bodies to go with his 2 faces. The one that went with his half-crazed dictator face was very big, dressed in the sort of black leather greatcoat the SS would have gone in for, if they had had access to top-quality dragon hide, and draped liberally with interesting-looking weapons. You'd need an active, not to say warped imagination. No, it's not, I just did that because it was fun. You would want an active, not to say warped imagination to work out what they were designed to do to you, but any fool could see they were weapons. Fiendish ones, probably.
"Come on, you goddamn sons of bitches!"
he was shouting.
"Move it!"
He moved the stub of a cigar round in his jaw as he shouted. Somewhere just north of his hip pocket, a particularly abstruse weapon shrugged and metamorphosed smoothly into a pearl-handled revolver. As his footsteps echoed away down the corridor, 2 bleary-eyed spectral warriors opened their doors and looked out at each other.
"What?"
yawned one of them.
"You know what?" replied the other. "I have this feeling we aren't going to enjoy this."
His comrade in arms was suddenly aware that he was still wearing his Snoopy t-shirt. He turned hurriedly away and reached for his regulation-issue shapeless black cowl, and so failed to notice that his colleague had come to the door still holding the copy of the Ballet Goer's Companion he'd been reading, under the blankets.
"With the torch?"
"Better get ready," said the closest ballet domain. They both withdrew into the cells. A few minutes later they fell in for parade. Something about their leader's manner as he paced up and down inspecting them didn't do much to cheer them up. In this persona, Finance and General Purposes was sometimes known as the Grand Old Man, or Old Ironsides, or simply the General, and a lot of other things too. He stopped and pointed with his riding crop, his hand quivering with rage.
"Oh, shit,"
whispered the Snoopy fan to his neighbour. They surreptitiously swivelled their eyes to the left, saw what the matter was, then quietly and sincerely thanked Providence that it wasn't one of them. 8765B had forgotten to take his face mask off. Accordingly, the row consisted of 49 billowing black cowls, empty except for a pair of indescribably horrible points of red light, and 1 pale pink face with spectacles and razor ash. 49 pairs of indescribably horrible points of red light closed, and the cows surrounding them winced. A spectral warrior who turns out on parade improperly dressed doesn't get away with just whitewashing stones or cutting the grass with nail scissors.
"You!"
hissed the General.
"Fall out."
The pink face sagged like a deflating balloon and fell down inside the cowl. "But," said a tiny voice from a long way down.
"I said fall out, soldier! You deaf?"
"Sir," there was a high sigh of pity and terror. The proportions were those of an extremely dry martini. As first the cowl and then the rest of the habit slowly crumpled to the ground and lay there in a heap, like a pair of drunken trousers. For spectral warriors, the words of command tend to mean what they say. The General looked around and bit into his cigar butt.
"What's the matter?"
he snapped.
"You never seen an immortal soul busted before."
Complete silence. When, eventually, the late A765B's collar pin hit the ground, it sounded like a small explosion.
"All right,"
growled the General.
"Move it."
There was a crash of boots on the tarmac. With a grunt of satisfaction, the General gave the signal, and the column moved forwards at a terrified quick march towards the waiting trucks. Perhaps it would have comforted the spectral warriors to know that about a quarter of an hour's drive away, exactly the same person as the 100% bastard who was staring at them and willing one of them to have forgotten to blanco his bayonet frog was cowering under a chair and making noises like a petrified kitten. Maybe not. There was a hushed silence. You could almost hear the thought, feel the tension. If there had been a barometer nearby, it would have screamed. Eventually,
"Yeah,"
said the Count of the Saxon shore, "I'll have the veal as well. So that's 3 veal, 1 chicken, 1 osso bucco, and 3 bottles of the red." The Emperor's sister shook her head. "Veal's off, sorry," she said. "Forget to mention, goddamn butcher didn't deliver again today." The electors looked at each other for a long time. It was the County Palatine who eventually put it into words.
"Hey," he said, "what's going on around here?"
It's all got confusing. So there's not 1 but 2 staffs, and they both look the same, and Doppel's not the doppelganger of the doppelganger, and there's lots of... If you manage to keep up, 10 points to you. So I was really lucky this week. I got a gift from Tasmania. And as you know, I don't ask for anything. I'm just grateful that you're all here. I was so grateful for this because obviously I've known Warren, talked to him for a long time, and his lovely other half, Mary Lou, they've sent me some Tektite, which is Darwin glass, and I'm still reading up about it because they were kind enough to include paper, but it was something that they'd actually mined themselves, and well, it was I am over the moon. It was such a lovely gift. It's the second gift I've had from the Antipodeans, and I was actually really lucky because our other friend, you know who you are, made me the most wonderful embroidered scarf and sent me a couple of cat toys that they had made as well. And yeah, so the Tektite is essentially from space, and I'm overwhelmed with it a bit really because it's so very generous, and I'm very, very grateful, and I do really appreciate it. And as I said, I don't ask anything of anybody. Just you being here is everything, and if you let me know that you're okay, then I'm happy. But it was such a wonderful gift. It really was. I want to think of something to send back. Any ideas, anybody? Any ideas? What do you think is the most unique thing you could possibly think of that's in the UK? Actually, that'd be just an interesting talking point, really. What is the most unique thing you know about the UK? And we're going to try and avoid everything else that's going on in the world at the moment because, let's face it, it's gone to hell in a handbasket. Everything's an absolute cluster fudge, and we've just got to keep looking forward, put the blinkers on, go, keep looking forward, keep looking forward. Oh, lovely beans. Okay, so I'm about to start Wookiee yawning. And again, it's that time for a nanning up. You know when you yawn and your uvula kind of like rattles? That sounds like a baby Wookiee. Goodness gracious. So, sorry it's a bit late, this one. Trying to get back into it, trying to adapt to a few things. And, yeah, everything's tickety-boo. But please, if you're too hot, hydrate. If you're too cold, wrap up warm like a human burrito like I am right now with my new blankie. And most of all, stay safe and take care. Talk to you soon, Petal.